Okay, this is a video that's going to make a few connections. It's even going to make a few connections that we've made in a recent video and so on. This was sent to me by a person and said, this is maybe the video you were looking for, or the clip that you were looking for. I said, well, I say now, no it wasn't, but in fact this will do a little bit better than the one that I had. For this one is listed from the year 2000, and I was looking at something that was back in the late 1980s. But we'll look into what it said in the wiki article that I have that connects to it. I talked about in a recent video about through the looking glass and ancient astronomers and what they might have used in a few places, different places. And with this we can make the connection of the of the Chaldees and ancient archaeoastronomy, knowledge of the ancients and things, and how they knew a little bit more than it seems like that, at least on one aspect of things, and go through this and who the ancient Aryans were and how they had brought apart or upon the earth this ancient knowledge. You're looking here at a lens that they've found. We've talked a lot about lenses recently. In fact, we'll brush upon these ancient blue-eyed lenses of the ancient Egyptians in the earliest dynasties, which is an extreme oopart for them to have been able to even make a lens like that. But we'll get there when we get there. For this is an article entitled, "Did the Vikings make a telescope?" It's from the year 2000. But there's a bunch of these lenses that they have, and people have put together lenses and put together a few other connections, and oh my God, if you put a few lenses together, you make a telescope. It's by BBC News Online science editor, Dr. David Whitehouse. Well, yeah, you hear a lot of weird crap coming, of course, through the media of BBC now, and I've noticed quite a bit of it, as we have in America and other places, and false history documentaries and all kinds of things. And I don't know if you've realized it, but the History Channel no longer teaches history. In reality, it's gone on to these fake shows and mermaids and all kinds of crap, ancient aliens and stuff like that. And while ancient aliens was a additive to get people to think about other things, now they've grasped into all these weird concepts and kind of gone off in left field for what you would expect from the History Channel. But when I grew up, we had MTV. It was music television, nothing but music and videos, and not too much other BS. Slowly but surely it turned into no videos, no music, and a lot of BS. So they made a YouTube, or they made a MTV2, and that's the one that at least had some rock and roll and things going on to it. No, oh, that got ruined too, but that's not about this. Let's get into the story here. The Vikings could have been using a telescope hundreds of years before Dutch spectacle makers supposedly invented the device in the late 16th century. This remarkable possibility has emerged from a study of sophisticated lenses just recognized from a Viking site on the island of Gotland. Got is God, God's land, in the Baltic Sea. They were initially thought to be merely ornaments, and we'll get into that in both of the situations, and how they, well, it's ornamental, no, it's symbolic, no, it's, oh wow, it's something totally different. Here's a group of them. It seems that the elliptical lens design was invented much earlier than we thought, and then the knowledge was lost somehow, says Dr. Olaf Schmidt of Ehlen University in Germany. The late Dr. Karl-Heinz Wilms first heard of the so-called Vizbee lens in 1990 when he was searching for exhibits for a Munich museum. It was named after the major town in Gotland. Dr. Wilms found a picture of the lens in a book and planned to examine the original. And here's some of the Visby lenses. And you can see they look different arcs and different points of them. Some of them having convex bottoms on them and others not. And so what were these supposedly from? These crystal lenses, glass lenses. Well, but it was not until 1997 that a team of 3 scientists went to Gotland and take a close look at what were actually 10 lenses locked away in the storeroom of a local museum. Perfect shape, they say. One of the team, Dr. Olaf Schmidt, told BBC News Online, I was excited, of course. See if I can get it out. The polish of some of the lenses was almost perfect. The second thing that caught our eye was that their imaging was very good. So you could see through them, the clarity of it and everything, but then also they're just almost perfect. But then after being ground around in the ground for a long time, you could tell they were even at a better state at one point. Of course, like anything would be like that. But when the lenses were put through their paces, the team was amazed. The lenses passed a series of tests almost as well as modern optics. Understand that they still pulled that off after being hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, but there's an idea that these lenses may have been kept sacred from a long way back. Yeah, so we're going to go deeper than this even. This Viking thing, it's, wow, the Vikings, what? No. We know who the Vikings ended up coming from, right? We've been talking about that and the elves and things like that and how that all works together. And the ancient Scythians and people of that from ancient times. We'll touch upon that here later. Stick with me. Made from rock crystal, the lenses have an accurate shape that betrays the work of a master craftsman. The best example of the lenses measures 50 millimeters or so, or 2 inches, sacred measurement, in diameter, and 30 millimeters thick at its center. And you do know that by looking at lenses, however thick they are at the center versus the diameter, is giving you a different focal point and different ledge, if y'all understand it. It's why your glasses, each one is different thicknesses and things like that focus your eye again. And these things are like that also. And we'll talk about eyes and lenses here a little bit later. Stick with me. But that convex in shape that's there, that shape of a lens that's cupped over, gives that focal point. We have one on our eye, but we use ones like this in conjunction with each other, exactly spread apart to certain points, or it's never going to focus. But when you get them all lined up and in focus within region, boom, everything comes very clear, and one can see extremely far. We've talked about that in the other deal, about other video about crystal lenses and through the looking glass, which some say, well, it's a mirror and everything. Yeah, well, it's also something else whenever you're looking through a looking glass. Get into a couple of other stories here coming up, but let's continue. The surface of some of these lenses have an almost perfect elliptical shape, Dr. Schmidt said. They were obviously made on a turning lathe. The lenses have a flattened central area that makes them excellent magnifiers. Like a magnifying glass, if you've ever played with one. If you've ever played with one too, you get a certain distance from something and it's in focus. Ironically, when that happens, if you hold it up and the sun's rays are coming in, you can burn ants or burn things whenever you're a kid. We'll get into a story about something like that here in a minute, but they have a magnification quality. Now, a series of these are used in magnifying glasses is one, but series of them together make modern day microscopes, and if you flip it kind of the other way, you make a telescope. It's kind of complicated, but then again, how complicated were these people of old? Well, we're talking about Vikings, but I'm fixing to take it back a whole lot farther. Stick with me. They could have been used as magnifiers, allowing the fine carving to be carried out, or they could have been used to start fires or to burn wounds and cuts so they did not get infected. I'm willing to believe they might have used them for quite a few reasons. An ancient fire starter, you took a magnifying glass when you're a kid and you get it tilted at an angle and it keeps making a hourglass shape where one is smaller than the other when you're doing it on the ground, and you try to get it to where it focuses over a certain point. Whenever you do, if this is a combustible material, and you lift it and get it in the right point, and all of a sudden it gets to be a searing point like a laser, and combustion starts. Now we get to talk about magic that I recently did a video on, and that's magic. I took the power of the sun, I made the sun god light a fire. Much like Ezekiel and the Baal worshippers and so on, I can light a fire like that. Well, most people agree that that goes along with naphtha and fire creating things. Well, they're going to kind of mention that later, even to go with the lensing effect, but let's go ahead and get into it here. What intrigues the researchers is that that the lenses are of such high quality that they could have been used to make a telescope some 500 years before the known first crude telescopes were constructed in Europe in the last few years of the 16th century. So it appears that we must have some type of lost knowledge going on here, and these things were kept. And at the very end, they got taken and put into ornaments in a sacred way, and then that eventually kept for people, and then were put in their graves. So in a way, they lost their usage. And so whenever they tell you there's a magic orb in the top of that scepter, and this does that and that does that, maybe this hints back to an idea of knowledge that other people didn't understand that one people definitely did at the time. The Gotland crystals provide the first evidence that sophisticated lens making techniques were being used by craftsmen over 1,000 years ago. Isn't that amazing? Well, I'm going to take it back much farther than that. I'm going to multiply that thousands number here in a second. And I'll also reveal that that's not where it began. They're telling you here it must have been a perfected art already at the time that they made that. I'll show you some of that. At that time, scientists only just started to explore the laws of light and refraction. I'm telling you it didn't, for they already knew about rainbows and things like that, splitting of light. In fact, it's told in ancient tales where they had some crystal and it made it cut into beams and so on, and Semiramis and this child was born, and all these things go with it. It's freaky. If you're watching my videos, I don't want to go on a 30-40 minute tirade of all the stuff that I just mentioned right there and how it makes connectives. Hopefully you've got that in with you, and we'll just continue. According to the researchers, it's clear that the craftsmen who figured the lenses knew more about applied optics than did the scientists of the time. In fact, they appear to know as much about optics as the derived knowledge of the late 16th century making the telescopes. But it goes back much further. They must have worked by trial and error, because the mathematics to calculate the best shape for a lens did not become available for several hundred years after that. Just signifying this is an extreme oopart. The researchers speculate that the knowledge to make such an accurate lens was known to only a few craftsmen, perhaps only one person, and when you eventually lose that person, turns into legend and myth, and they keep that stone. They didn't know how to use it necessarily, or maybe they did, but in a way they took and put it into scepters and sacred amulets and so on, and it's got magic in it. What are you talking about? Well, it goes with all this stuff. I don't know, but it's powerful. What do you mean powerful? It's 3 times lens. That's powerful. What if you hook up these 3 together? You know, in all the ancient D&D things I did where we had to do certain things, one of the things that was created out of it is that we had to go get this ancient amulet. We had to get a circlet for your head that had an amulet, and we had to get this and that and the other. What was it to do? Well, you had to give it to Merlin. He was going to do something special with it, and da-da-da. What was he going to do with it? Well, he was going to end up taking all of them out of it, making lenses for telescopes, and then looking upon the stars in a farther way than he could, because his eyesight had gotten bad. And it's only when you really realize it right there, and he had other things memorized pretty much. And by using it like a pair of glasses, he can now look at things that he couldn't before. And it's what all you were doing those things for, to get that so he could see that and then decipher the ruins in a way like Odin and so on, that could bring about a spell that could take you back to a time before what happened that ruined everything and fixed it all. You'll kind of understand if y'all have heard my little stories about how we ran through that. But funny how this all goes together. It seems clear that the Vikings did not make the lenses themselves. I don't know why they're trying to say that, but it must go back from an earlier time and kept sacred things. There are hints that the lenses may have been manufactured in the ancient empire of Byzantium or in the region of Eastern Europe, Dr. Schmidt said. Some of these lenses can be seen at Gotland's Fornsal, the historical museum in Visby. Some are in the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm. Others have been lost. Others are still sitting in museums right now, and they're like, I don't know, it's this thing, you went to a scepter and stuff. Well, if you'll lift it up over some newsprint here, you'll see that, oh damn. So let's look at the next thought or story here. For what we're going to do is look at these Visby lenses. You can find this in Wikipedia. Fairly easy. Visby. Here's one that's been encrusted in a silver setting like an amulet, but it also has that sacred geometry going around it and a little cluster. If you'll look, and it's not a 5-pointed star, it's a 5-lobed flower. Yeah. The Visby lenses are a collection of lens-shaped manufactured objects made of rock crystal found in several Viking graves on the island of Gotland, Sweden, and dating from the 11th or 12th century. Some were in silver mounts with filigree, the mounting covering the back of the lens, and were probably used as jewelry. It has been suggested that the lenses themselves are much older than their mounts. Some of these lenses can be seen at the Fornsal Historical Museum in Visby. Some are in the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm, and others have been lost. See, here's the predates, okay? It was reported by Otto Ostrom in 1950 that most have an aspheric surface. What is this? Well, aspheric lenses are convexed out. It's not just a chunk of a ball, but it arches back out in a way that makes a lens. This is the magnifying lens. This is a magnifying glass that you're looking at, right? And how it works. And they're saying, well, all these things are built like that. The best of these lenses have low spherical aberration. Oh, that's a little fancy science word. It means like they work perfectly. Spherical aberration is a type of aberration found in optical systems. It'll make it wiggly. It'll make it wobbly. Remember when the Hubble Space Telescope had this little blur in it, and it just screwed up everything because they're looking at such small points of things that it magnified its effect even. But they were able to put in this thing that readjusted it back. Well, we're fixing to have the new Webb one out there that's hopefully not screwed up in any way, and it will see actually much better, not just on optics alone, but in its other ways. But aberration of lenses is where it has a little wibble or a wobble and doesn't quite look right. Cheaply made or not formed, but yet these are extremely well formed, indicating that the surface profile was optimized to improve image quality. Most of the lenses, however, do not show any signs of optimization and produce worse images than simple spherical lens. The lenses are biaspheric, and 2 of them have very good imaging properties. Their surface appears to be an oblate ellipse, while the surface nearest the eye approaches a parabola. These are just shapes. Parabola form, right? And then ellipse is cut on an angle, right? Best example of the lenses measure 50 millimeters, 22 inches, as we talked about, in diameter, and is a thickness of 30 millimeters at its center with an angular resolution of 25 to 30 farams. So this measurement here is pretty good. Vizbee lenses, visible. Wow. Lenses provide an evidence that sophisticated lenses make techniques making techniques were being used by artisans over 1,000 years ago. We're going to go back farther than that. At a time when researchers only had just begun to explore the laws of refraction, they said again, so you can tell this is kind of taken from the same articles, right? But there are more. According to Schmidt and his co-workers, it's clear that the artisans worked by trial and error, since the mathematics to calculate the best form for a lens were not discovered until several hundred years later. But this, they've already told you already here that they are not working through it. They had already figured this out through a progression, and it comes from way back before. That this could no way been, let's just try to do that. No. It's something that goes back, but it's been lost. It's been suggested that the knowledge required to make such lenses was restricted to only a few people, perhaps only one. So here we get that same statement. Excavations at Frogel in Gotland in 1999 discovered evidence of local manufacture of beads and lenses from rock crystal, with unworked pieces of crystal coexisting with partially finished beads and lenses, like it was a making place. It was a place for manufacture. Prior to the Frogel finds, it has been suggested that the lenses were not produced by the Vikings, as there are hints that they were in fact produced by Byzantine Europe, or the Vikings of Gotland were known to have participated in trade networks that reached as far as Constantinople. Well, it reached farther than that. In fact, there are connectives that reach it all the way over to the Tarim Basin type of people and all the way down into India. Sanskrit languages and things make connections, but in Proto-Indo-European, as we've talked about quite a few times, but they had connections to reach farther than that. But are you saying that they got this in trade somehow? Or perhaps they inherited it? Or were the carriers of light? Maybe they didn't know what to do with it, or maybe it was on purpose that they put them in certain amulets and things, just like the wizard story I told you about, and you have to put them back together. And that got lost. Like in Lord of the Rings, and some things that should have not been forgotten. Well, they weren't totally forgotten. People knew of it. Hints and researchers and stuff coming out of the Dark Ages were able to look back into things and go, hold on, this is talking about, oh, wow. So they had these lenses things. Let me see if I can work it out, put these couple together. Oh, wow, look, I can see real close to something, or I can do it this way and we can see real far away. The moon's much closer. Wonder if I can strengthen that. Well, let's put a magnifying glass in front of that. Oh my gosh. Various uses have been proposed for the lenses. They have been used by artisans, magnification for fine work, some as reading stones. This is a reading stone. They found a bunch of these, and this reading stone you can hold here, and just due to its thickness, it magnifies lenses. They have these for old people now. They kind of look cuter and more square, and you can run them over a book, and it totally magnifies it. Or you have a handheld magnifying glass that you use during reading. You're familiar with these. If you don't have this, you have reading glasses that pull off the same effect. Well, how old are these stones that do this type of reading? Well, it goes way back. In fact, remember recently telling you in a Persian story, there's this guy, and he's got these books, and it seems like a tablet in it in a weird way, and he comes to learn knowledge, and he tries to pull off a cocky routine, and he goes, this is knowledge known in books and stuff, and this guy takes a reading stone, and he starts to read. So, well, they tell you that like he's going to read the books, he's going to read a tablet, read the stone. He's what? No, look, he took a reading stone, and looking upon the book, it suddenly burst into flames. And the other guy freaks out, and he tells him, this is a knowledge not found in your book. Kind of makes a connection to me. Hopefully you too. But they could use these for that, to start fire. Olaf Schmidt has speculated they may have been used even to make a telescope, because that works out. So now let's look at another thing in similar lenses and go much farther back. For, let's see, there's the one mention here. If I just back it up one, does it go to it? Pardon me. Now there's a thing called a Nimrod's lens. What? Yeah, the Nimrud or Nimrod lens. So let's carry it back to ancient Assyria, and perhaps it came from a time earlier than that, but associated with that, the Nimrod lens is also called the layered lens. That's from Austin Henry Layard, famous Assyriologist. 3,000-year-old piece of rock crystal which is unearthed in 1850 in modern-day Iraq. May have been used as a magnifying glass or as a burning glass to start fires or concentrate sunlight, or a piece of decorative inlay. Just kind of leaving it out there, but they talk about it has a focal point about 11 centimeters from the flat side and a focal length of about 12 centimeters. This would make an equivalent to a 3 times magnifying glass. The surface of the lens has 12 cavities that are open during grinding, which would have contained naphtha or some other fluid trapped in the raw crystal. This lens is said to be able to focus sunlight, although the focus is far from perfect. Because the lens is made from a natural rock crystal, the crystal and the material of the lens is not deteriorated significantly over time. That's not necessarily true. You can look at it here and tell it has an ablation to it, and in fact, being through the sand that it did, it almost sandblasted this thing, and it has somewhat clarity. You can see the white stick through it up close, but at a distance, it gets real cloudy with this stick that's just a few inches back, whereas that's supposed to still be in clarity. And if someone was to polish this thing up and take out the sand wear onto it, they would find that it has that effect. This literally looks like you took the magnifying glass lens out of a magnifying glass, and you no longer have the receptacle or holder, but there's the piece of glass. So the lens is said to be able to focus sunlight, although the focus is far from perfect because the lens made from natural. But those others are made from natural. We're fixing to look at other ones that are made from natural and take it back before this date, for they're telling you this was probably created in 710 BC. But if they were trying to relate it back to the time of Nimrod and the things that go with it, that's far past. And they need to put 1,000 in front of that too, don't they, people? So now we went from the 1600s, from the possibility of them having it, to a few hundred years before that, nearly 1,000. No, now we're cut to BC. From 1600 AD, it turns into 1700, 1600 BC. We've reached 3,000 years more, but 1700 BC, can I take it any farther back than that? Let's look at a few more words here first. They tell you the function of it's not clear. Assyrian craftsmen made intricate engravings and could have used a magnifying lens in their work. Ancient Scythians, you wonder how they do that little small gold work and everything. Perhaps they were using it for that too, but maybe you can use these for multiple purposes. It's amazing. Lenses we do today. The discovery of the lens noted that he had found small inscriptions on Assyrian artifacts which he suspected to have been achieved by the aid of a lens. Ancient Italian scientist Giovanni Pettinato of the University of Rome has proposed that the lens was used by ancient Assyrians as part of a telescope, and that this explains their knowledge of astronomy. Those ancient Chaldeans, see Babylonian astronomy. Ooh, there's a lot of things about that, and we've talked about a lot of it, but I'll just make mental connections here in a second. Experts on Assyrian archaeology are unconvinced, though, but doubting that the optical quality of the lens is sufficient to be of much use. Well, before it got sand gridded, it probably would have been. The ancient Assyrians saw the planet Saturn as a god surrounded by a ring of serpents. We've talked about this in serpent worship quite a bit frequently, but it's been a while since I went through this and Saturn thing, but you look at some of those videos, I did a series on Saturn and mentioned this quite well, and that's Saturn, so this is Saturn, this is Saturn, and all these different people had this same type of guy hooked up with that same planet. The ancient Phoenician word for Saturn, the wandering star, was Israel. So when they talk about the people of Israel, it has a totally different meaning than what people are led to believe today. Yet, Petalino suggests that it was their interpretation of Saturn rings possibly seen through a telescope. I'm telling you also that they could see that ring, and you understand that as a halo, and that they deified that god. He had the halo now, and how that worked with all the people, and how all of a sudden it changed a little bit, and it seems like it all went with storm gods. Well, that also makes sense, and even without this, that they did so in a time of extreme farming, and in this area in the Middle East became drought. They start worshiping the bringer of rain and storms. Sure, it's the keeper of life. Kind of makes sense. But other experts say that serpents occur frequently in Assyrian mythology, and note that there's no mention of a telescope or any of the many surviving Assyrian astronomical writings. No, there are things that they kept secret and didn't have just in simple tableted writings. That still goes on today somewhat. But you can learn a lot about what they knew in the ancients without having to get in to be the secret type of club necessarily. For a lot of these knowledge of how to make telescopes and things like this is all just knowledge now that's just drifted out and everybody's got it. So when you look back at it, you don't put as much levity on it that you should have. Those Levites did. Levity. Give weight to the concept of it. But then we look at other depictions of Saturn and this omphalos that surrounds our world with snakes, and that he's the god of this world and so on, and people making connections with it here and with there, as above so below, and here we are, and we have this ancient giant snake that's around us, and you can connect that to ancient Babylon and places, ancient Samaria way before it, but it comes on farther, for in Greek and Roman statues you see the snake associated with him curled around. Hermes, Mercury knows all about it. It's got him on a stick. Controls it. With the ancient omphalos, same thing, but yet, how about Jorgenmander and the world snake? Now we're back over there in that Viking area. But we were over here in that same people's area before, and how that all worked. Isn't that amazing if you put it all together, how simple it seems to come out, hopefully for you. According to his book, Layard found the lens buried at a depth, other pieces of glass which looked like the enamel of an object, perhaps made of wood or ivory, which had disintegrated. The British Museum curator notes that possibly the lens would have been used as a piece of inlay, or perhaps for furniture, like just putting an inlay in furniture, as opposed to using it what it anciently used to use for. There's no evidence that Assyrians used the lenses for their optical qualities, i.e. for magnification, telescopy, or for starting fires. But then again, there kind of is, because here's the thing that would easily be able to do that, just as easy. Seems like there's always the yin and yang of saying, well, it could do this, it could do that, but there's that looking glass that we were talking about before. And you can tell it's been aberrated and pitted real bad and unpolished from its original crystal state. In fact, huge smudges through here in a blend. Cracks seem to be formed into it somewhat, but you could have seen through the clear areas, even if that crack or that aberration would have been in there, for it would have been a great clear stone and something that they kept sacred for a long time. And I guess when the Assyrians took over Sumer and took all the artifacts they didn't know quite what it had to do with, and used it in a different way, huh? So they're giving it 710 BC, but on the naming alone and the site and stuff, you could go back almost 1,000 years before that. And if you just say that they took it like they're saying and didn't understand it quite well, come from an earlier time, it makes more sense. Let's look at one more time of crystal lenses used for things, and eyes and optics and ooparts. For if we go one more here, you can see a Pinterest, and all I tried to look up was blue-eyed crystal blue eye Egyptian, or Egypt. And in Pinterest it shows up copper. which I tell you, he looks quite a bit like my father. Not necessarily here, and he looks kind of smiling, kind of not. But if you look at him from the right a little bit, the eyes don't glow as well as blue because you're not head on at him. But he has a smile to him, and really at that point he looks a lot like my father. I could show you a picture of it from my dad was 40-ish or so. But these are crystal blue eyes made out of a lens, and they're made to perfection. Let's see if I can get this to, there we go. We're not going to zoom in on this much, but I've shown this so many times. In fact, there was a place where I had a much better connection of them all going together. What's weird about some of these eyes is that you can catch them at an angle, and they're kind of a gray blue, but as you get straight onto them, they turn very blue. Here's another version of copper, and you see there they're kind of a grayish blue and not quite pulling it off. There's a famous picture of Horaha here, who is supposed to be the second pharaoh ever. They say, well, it's supposed to be connected with the 12th dynasty, so on. But these guys that we're looking at, in fact, Rahotep over here on the left, is from the 5th dynasty. Prince Rahotep and Nofret, his wife, and you can tell how pale she is, and these are ancient Caucasians that heralded and started out Egypt. In fact, you can find blue-eyed effigies of them all the way back in the pre-dynastic, gold-wrapped statues and so on, and of course the blonde Gibelline mummy known as Ginger. In a modern day, there's academia trying to get all, oh, I'm not too sure now, and really the more you look into it, the more certain we are. Isn't it odd how that keeps happening to people? So here's a connection of faces and stuff and recreations, and in that there's Nefertiti and her recreation of that. But here's the ancient statue she had, and I don't know why in the recreation they gave her this kind of brownish green eye and also darkened the skin a little bit, for even if you look at this and the light portions and where she was, her skin, but then that's one of those crystal blue eyes. And it's much later dynasties too than they even give credit for up here in Horaha, the guy up here who has these crystal blue eyes. You can tell the phenotype of these people. It's not too hard to tell. I always make the fun of this looks like Freddie Mercury somewhat, but Freddie had a much bigger overbite than this situation. Overbites are common with these people though. Huh, that's strange. But you can see these crystal blue eyes in Egypt, in Sumer, and now we make connections there. But this is just lapis lazuli, which the Egyptians were enamored with and crazy about, but yet here we have Egypt and these crystal blue eyes, totally see-through, perfect eyes, and they seem to have been made on the same arc as a human eye. And what's neat about it is the white around the outside of them here is a white alabastrish type stone granite that has pink little lines in it, and so it would look much like your eyes white that you have around the outside of it, and then the crystal blue eye looks just like their crystal blue eyes. And that connects to the people that heralded civilization in Sumer, in Egypt, all the way through to China, all the way through to India, things that I've brought up quite a bit. They even have statues that have these inlaid eyes. There's no blue to them, but they're really just inlaid eyes with black or dilated eyes in there. But you look at that and people are unsure. Well, whenever you do a mummy, just like beef, it turns beef jerky and everything turns dark, and now they figured out that they shellac them over with this tar and bitumen and stuff, and the tar conifer is made from conifer trees, and that comes from Europe. So all these things done in trade and ancient sacred rites and everything, oh, it goes much farther. It's not just something that's extremely local and very personal, and you can see it connects to quite a few other things. But this guy here has red hair. Oh, that's henna, that's this, that, and other. Looked at it under a microscope. Dude had red hair. It's very common, but it's very common for people to try to omit that now in modern history, and how many pharaohs there are, Ramses and all of these other ones, leading to King Tut and Thuya and Yuya and all the ones that go along with it. And they tried to dismiss it and say, oh, the natron did it. And you go, well, what happened to the natron to all these people who have dark hair here? So there are people with dark hair, there are people with brown, chestnut, auburn. Oh, let's test natron on hair. Oh, it does nothing. Oh, okay, so these is pretty much the natural color of their hair. That's amazing. Look at it under a microscope. Sure enough, that's right. Here's a close-up of that eye. And you can see the little scribbles of pink that's around it, but you can also see that crystal form that's in it. How it goes back about 1.5 inches behind it, there's a recess. And there they painted a dot on the back, and that looks like the pupil of your eye, and it follows you around the room. This is actually an insert type of thing that they insert. It's all got it all built into one, so they make the statue and carved it out and put it in. They did it in a lot of these scribes and things like that, and the scribes got more of a natural look and not a pharaohistic perfection type of look to them. So you can see it, and again, here's copper, but you don't really notice the deep blue eyes in there, do you? You're just at a different angle, different lighting. There's Horaha again on the left. So let's just look down here, and of course ancient Tut. Oh, well, they didn't have the blue-eyed thing going on. Well, they perhaps lost the technology. Here's those ancient scribes, blue-eyed, easy to tell the phenotype, blue-eyed, easy to tell the phenotype. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th dynasty, what we're looking at here, earliest of dynasties. If you look up reserve heads, it's pretty easy to see what that equals out to too. But so while there was different depictions of them and so on, and again, this is a beef jerky, put pine tar on it. What pine tar make a bat handle look like whenever you play baseball? What a bet. So people tried to make all kinds of connections. This is the picture that looks like my dad, right there. And Queen Ty, well, they've already made connections with her, and her skeleton, her mummy she has this red auburn hair and everything going with it. And of course, black people try to claim it. Well, this is yew wood. It's so much more lighter than this, and it's not funny until it darkens over time, but they say that's an afro. Well, they look at it, it's got little stipplings onto it. They look at it real close, and they go, no, that's a silver veil. She's got a pharaoh's hat on below it, and by the way, here's her other effigies, and then here's her mummy. And so, no, again, please stop. So we see there it is, another good one of this is the seated scribe. I've done a couple of videos about that. You can definitely find them in my stuff. And crystal blue eyes at the very start, and there were no other people that were in there at that time, nor after, nor through, no matter what. Oh, they try to pick this guy out. Well, he has a slightly wider nose. I can show you some white people with slightly wider noses. In fact, you can look at Etruscans and the way that they look somewhat. But hey, look at Babe Ruth. Well, look at the fact that he has a beard and facial hair in the first place. You won't make connections. Here's Egypt. What does that look like to you? There's that seated scribe, but here up close we can see the lensing effect looking through it. And how polished it is, and you can see the surface reflected in the distance in the windows that are over there. Isn't that amazing? So you can look at it and you can find it in certain things. And of course, oh, there's a blue hat. So we know about the red hat and the white hat of Egypt, but you quite often see them in this blue. Who is it that carries white, red, white, and blue? Well, we find that quite a few of these Europeans carried this sacred flags, symbolic red, white, and blue, on from that. It's it there too. It's not necessarily just from that, for that carries back much farther too. Has symbolic readings. So you can see this picture of her, and you go, I don't see the blue eye. I see one eye left, it's not blue. Get at the right angle here, and it's pretty easy to see that's a blue eye. Of course, this is Nefertiti, and much later, but you can see it. I can see it. We can see it. And all these connections. Now, so it's totally screwed up. Where's the picture at? It's trying to restructure them and do everything, and think about the 14 pages I had pulled open and everything at once, so it makes a stupid connection. But there we go. And these pale women and red ochre men, well, that's in Egyptian art. Yeah, you can see that like crazy, and the priests are lighter too, but all the workers got tanned. Yeah, that's also in Minoan art and Etruscan, even Greek art. You can see it in there of the time, and connectives to all these people and symbology that they use. Long braided hair. Oh yeah, we still do that. It's a Bo Derek. There you go. Braids. Braids aren't exclusive. People try to act